When Dante was first released in Warframe, he was super omega busted, deleting entire rooms full of enemies even through walls. Then he got nerfed and everybody was mad, and then he got nerfed again with the enemy HP rework and everybody was even madder. However, now in 2025, Dante is so back in S tier again, and in my opinion, even stronger than he has ever been pre-nerf. So, in today's Warframe guide, we will take an updated look at Dante, go over what has changed, and of course, how you can build him to absolutely obliterate everything. Big shoutouts to all our generous channel members. Follow me on Twitch, link in the description down below. We actually did start live streaming regularly, so don't miss out on it. And with all that being said, well, let's jump right into it. Well, you know how it goes. The first thing we gotta naturally talk about is Dante's skills, but given the fact that I already put out a Dante guide when he was first released, we're only gonna have a little bit of a quicker overview of his kit because we already went into great detail on what his abilities can do in my previous video. First off, I want to talk about his first ability called Noctua, and that is Dante's exalted weapon. Noctua is a secondary weapon and it is a tome type weapon, you know, one of those magic books, and we're gonna go into more detail on it in just a minute here. But one thing that I find is very interesting to mention here, unlike many other exalted weapons in the game, the Noctua, when you have it out, does not drain your energy over time, it only consumes energy when you shoot at enemies. This, unlike other channeled exalted weapons, makes it possible to have the Noctua out and still use energy regeneration effects, like for example Energy Siphon, at the same time. And when we're talking about the Noctua, then we also should take a look at Dante's passive because that is very interwoven with the Noctua, making it that when you take out an enemy with the Noctua, this enemy will be scanned into your codex, similar to how a codex scanner would work. Each kill gives you one codex scan, and as soon as an enemy has been fully scanned into your codex, the Noctua will receive a permanent buff in the form of 50% more status chance against those fully scanned enemies, which in my opinion is very, very powerful. Let's go on now with the rest of his abilities, and this one is a little bit interesting because unlike other Warframes, for Dante, his second and third ability aren't really all that useful in and of themselves, and they're mainly just there to charge your fourth ability. See, ability number 2 gives you a little bit of overguard, and that is basically it, while ability number 3 deals a little bit of slash damage to enemies in the cone in front of you, not through walls anymore, and also this is not all that impressive. The reason why you use ability number 2 and 3 is that you have a little book symbol in the bottom right of your screen, and on the 2 pages of this book, the game will record in which order you have cast your second and third ability. And then once you use your fourth ability, you will get an effect depending on what the pages of this book show. So there are basically 4 different combinations. You could go 2-2-4, which will give you and allies in range a whole bunch of overguard as well as overguard regeneration after you get a killer assist. Excellent defensive utility. You could go 3-3-4, which deals a whole lot of damage because similar to a weapon like for example the Harmony, this condenses all damage over time effects that are on enemies into one big damage instance. That is how Dante was played on release because it was incredibly strong and kinda still is, to be honest. We have 2-3-4, which will summon a second Noctua companion that floats next to you and attacks enemies in sync with your attacks, also is given 2 allies in range. And finally, we have 3-2-4, which will create a couple of book-like bird creatures that follow you around, distract enemies and also attack them, and every enemy that gets attacked by your book little birdie companions will be weakened in the form that they get more susceptible to your status damage. So yeah, long story short, Dante has very great offensive as well as supporting capabilities. And of course, as always, if you could maybe leave a little like for the video, that would be mwah, chef's kiss, because it always helps Uncle Blacky big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But alright, now that we talked about Dante's abilities, let's take a little bit more of an in-depth look at the Noctua, Dante's exalted book, because that will be the main focus of today's build since it is incredibly strong, as you also saw in the intro. As we said in the previous chapter, you pull it out and you only consume energy whenever you shoot it. When the projectiles of this book hit an enemy, then they will split up into 4 sub-projectiles that fan out and hit other enemies in a cone in front of you. So similar to Slido 9's Exalted Sniper Rifle, there is quite a bit of AoE capability here, which is great. And the Noctua also has a little bar under the crosshairs, as you can see here, and once that is full, you can unleash an alt fire, which kind of looks similar to the Arca Plasma projectile. It's one projectile that flies forward and deals a whole lot of damage. You can charge this alt fire meter by either hitting enemies with your normal fire or, what many people don't know, also by picking up pistol ammo, which fills this meter up very, very quickly. Now, that's not quite it yet, because the Noctua also has a unique trait, and that is that unlike the Grimoire, the other tome weapon in the game, with the Noctua, there is no restriction as to how many tome mods you can put onto it. Let's also take a quick look at the stats, where the first thing that comes to mind is that the fire rate is relatively slow, unfortunately, but don't worry, we will have mods for that. However, the damage of 250 pure slash is very, very good, and also with a crit chance of 30% and a 2x multiplier, the Noctua has excellent crit performance, and it also has a very nice 25% status chance, so this book definitely packs a punch. And then for the alt fire, this whole thing gets turned up to 11 with a total of 2,750 damage split up between impact and radiation with 45% crit chance, 3x multiplier, 45% status chance. This alt fire deals a whole lot of damage, although I should say, in my opinion, the normal fire is still the focus of this weapon. But alright, so much for how the Noctua works. Let's now take a look at how to build the thing, where first of all, we go into crit because, we have good crit performance. That's why we go for Prime Pistol Gambit and Prime Target Cracker. I personally wouldn't necessarily go for Creeping Bullseye, because even though it has a lot of crit chance, the fire rate debuff really hurts because the Noctua already fires so slowly. And also, Pistol Acuity, you could theoretically go for it, but given the fact that we also have good status capabilities here, I think it's actually better if we go for Multi-Shot with Galvanized Diffusion as well as Lethal Torrent, which also adds a little bit more fire rate. That definitely comes in handy. And speaking of status chance, since we have a good base status chance of 25%, we do mod into that too. In fact, I believe the best build on the Noctua currently is a heat damage over time build. So naturally, what we do with such a build would be Prime TD Charge for the heat damage, a faction mod plus Pistol Elementalist to really amp up that heat damage over time, and then to increase the status chance and get massive extra damage, we naturally also go for Galvanized Shot. However, when it comes to Galvanized Shot on the Noctua, things start to get really, really crazy. See, as I mentioned in many previous videos already, gun condition overload effects like Galvanized Shot tend to be very inconsistent in how they interact with the weapon. Are they considered base damage? Are they multiplicative? And for the Noctua, they're very unique, because here, they actually don't give any damage to the weapon stats directly, but rather the damage buff is translated into some kind of ability strength buff that is additive with your Dante's ability strength and increases the Noctua's damage this way. What that means is that yes, Galvanized Shot will increase your Noctua's damage, but if Galvanized Shot happens to be your only source of quote-unquote base damage on the Noctua, then your Noctua ends up having actually no base damage modded onto it, because Galvanized Shot is considered ability strength for some reason. Finally, we use Yahoo Canticle in the Exilus slot, which is a very nice mod that makes it that whenever you take out an enemy with the Noctua, then all enemies in affinity range, so 50 meters by default, will permanently lose 5% off their armor or shields. This is a very great AoE armor stripping capability, and in my opinion, by far the best Exilus option for the Noctua. And before we go on to the Dante build itself, let's also quickly talk about the secondary arcane for the Noctua, because here we have multiple options, but I personally think the by far best one to go for here would be Secondary Encumber. Secondary Encumber makes it that whenever you deal a status effect, you have a 24% chance to deal another additional random status effect to the enemy. This allows you to shower the enemy in status effects, and this is very important because not only does it increase the effect of your Galvanized Shot, but it will also allow an interaction with our Dante build that you're going to see in a minute that is really, really darn cool, so keep that in mind. Just note that if you don't want to go for secondary encumber, then the second best option here would be Cascadia Flare that gives you a massive 480% base damage and is perfect with a heat build like this. But alright, let's finally talk about the Dante build itself, and the first thing I want to talk about here would be helmet options, because for Dante this is a little bit of a finicky topic. If you want to build your Dante as either a weapons platform or as an ability nuker with your 3-3-4 combination, then what you could do is subsume over your first ability, subsume over the Noctua, and use something else, because on those type of builds you wouldn't necessarily need the Noctua. In case that's what you want, then I would recommend you check out my older Dante video, because I do show some dedicated builds and options for those type of playstyles there. However, in today's video, we want to fully focus on a Noctua based build, which means obviously we can't subsume over the Noctua. And if you, like me, want to play Dante into the Noctua, then unfortunately you can't do any helmet shenanigans, because for that you really need all 4 abilities. As for how to play this build in practice, it's actually pretty darn simple. When the mission starts, you first go for your 2-2-4 combination to give yourself overguard to have the survivability, and then set up your buffs with the 2-3-4 and 3-2-4 before pulling out your Noctua and start blasting at the enemies. That's really all there is to it. In the Archon shards, I went full orange to give myself a lot of additional crit chance, but that's just my personal preference. What you could do alternatively would be also go for at least 2 yellow ones into more casting speed, because especially with Dante's gameplay, that means you're going to be spamming abilities quite a bit with him, so more casting speed really comes in clutch, and it's honestly kind of cringe to play Dante without casting speed. Let's now take a look at the build, where the first thing I want to talk about is one of the arcanes, and that would be Arcane Precision, giving you plus 300% base damage to secondary weapons, triggered on headshot, not headshot kill, just normal headshot, so you're pretty much gonna have this on all the time. And especially because on my Noctua build that I previously showcased, I didn't have any base damage. Arcane Precision for this build is incredibly important. In case though you already have base damage on your personal Noctua build, then I would recommend instead of Arcane Precision, go for Arcane Acceleration to give the Noctua much more fire rate. Then next, in the Excellence slot, I personally went for Preparation. I think this is a criminally underrated mod, filling up your entire energy at the beginning of the mission. That's perfect for higher level stuff like, for example, Archimedia. You just begin with full energy, you can start casting all your abilities, no problem. So that's my personal preference on Dante. Just real quick, you do not need Prime Surefooted on him, because you're gonna have Overguard, and that means you're immune to knockdown anyway. Now, in order to deal as much damage as possible with our Noctua, we want to have a lot of ability strength, which is why I go for Growing Power in the Aura, Armor Intensify, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, and this is the little nice interaction that I mentioned previously, Arcane Impetus. Arcane Impetus gives you ability strength and ability efficiency for every unique status effect that you deal to enemies with abilities. The good thing here is that the Noctua is an exalted weapon and therefore is considered an ability, and if we use secondary encumber on the Noctua, like I previously said, which deals random status effects, that means we're gonna have Arcane Impetus at the maximum of 13 stacks basically all the time, as you can also see in the background right here, and that means a constant plus 78% ability strength and plus 39% ability efficiency, which is very good because more efficiency means the Noctua drains less energy when you fire it, and that makes the energy economy incredibly easy to keep up here. And speaking of energy, of course, we go with Primed Flow and Equilibrium to make sure that we really are always full. Primed Continuity for a little bit more ability duration on our buffs. Natural Talent for the casting speed, because I personally don't have casting speed shards. However, if you do have casting speed shards, you could use something else here. And finally, and also very important and the main reason why we want to go for a heat damage over time build with a Noctua, Archon Vitality, because Archon Vitality doubles the heat status effects that you deal with abilities, aka with the Noctua, and that means you deal basically double the damage. This would be the full build. Just one thing to note here, my personal Archon Vitality here is max rank, but since we only use this mod for the sort of substat, you could also save some mod space on your build and just go with a rank 0 Archon Vitality. Doesn't make any difference in practice. Now, so much for the Dante build himself, but before you click away, there are two important additional things that will elevate the performance of your build, and that is with regards to the low fire rate of the Noctua, and we kinda need to compensate for that. So, other than modding for more fire rate, two additional things we can do here is, as a companion, choose anything that has at least 1200 shields and then combine that with Reinforced Bond, because that will give you an additional 60% fire rate. And secondly, use any weapon of the Firax family, so the normal Firax, MK1 Firax, or Firax Wraith, and equip this weapon with the Amalgam Firax Body Count mod, because in the substat, this mod gives another 45% fire rate to secondary weapons. That means you will have 105% additional fire rate for your Noctua, which is very, very good. And if you want to delete entire rooms with your fists, then check out this Atlas guide right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostalnix Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Onnakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.